So my name's Damian Mehers. I work for Evernote, based out of Geneva in Switzerland, although, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm English. And I'm lucky enough to be focused on working with wearable technology at Evernote. So I've developed experimental clients and played around, prototyped with quite a few different devices that I'm going to talk about today. And some of them have actually made it onto into production. So this is an advert from the New York Times, and I'm particularly happy about seeing this because I can finally tell my mother that I actually work on something real, that she can actually see this real advert with my real product that I created sitting there in the New York Times. Before I start, I'd just like a show of hands. Who here knows what Evernote is? Okay, that's great. Who doesn't know what Evernote is? Okay, that's even better. There's like two hands. So Evernote is really about making you more intelligent, making you smarter, and our apps are around creating notes, synchronizing them across all kinds of different platforms. But I'm going to skip over my introductory slides just about what Evernote is. But I have another question for you. Who knows what this is? Anybody? Now, the thing is, I haven't got the faintest idea either. This turned up in my office at home, where I work from home, and I had absolutely no idea what this piece of plastic was. Now, what do you do with these kind of things? Remote controls for devices you're not sure about, or little screws, bits of covers, plastic like this. What do you do with them? Well, if you're like me, you throw them in a drawer and just forget about them. But you can be sure of absolutely two things. If you decide to throw it in the drawer and forget about it, you'll never need that piece of plastic again for the rest of your life. On the other hand, if you decide to throw it away, then that piece of plastic will turn out to be absolutely vital. So I do the same as everybody else. I throw them in a box, like this box here. But I do one thing before I throw them in the box, which is I take a quick photo and store that photo in Evernote. So that when I need that piece of plastic, because you can be sure I will eventually need it, I can quickly scan through my notes in Evernote and find that piece of plastic, and I can know which box it's in, and fetch it. I don't only use it for weird pieces of plastic. I also use it for things that have sentimental value, things that I can't just bring myself to throw away. And one of those things is on the top left-hand side there is that little calculator. It's a really cool calculator watch. I was an early adopter of wearable technology. In the early 1980s, digital watches were the thing to have, and I lusted after a watch like this, and eventually I managed to get it. Not only is it a calculator watch, but it's also a remote control, which is really handy for annoying your parents, changing the channel at home, or if you're in a bar or in a pub and you want to be able to switch the channel or turn the volume down, you can do that. So all this is to say that I'm an early adopter of wearable technology. But I don't like all wearable technology, or I have some opinions about some kinds of wearable technology. So there are going to be two parts to this presentation. The first part, I'm going to share with you my experience using and developing for a range of different mobile or wearable devices. So I've developed clients for the Pebble, the Sony smartwatch, the Samsung Galaxy Gear, and I'm experimenting with Google Glass. So I'm going to share my experience with some code snippets around each of these different devices. And I'm also going to share with you my perspective on what makes sense for wearable technology. Why would you develop an app for a wearable device? What's the difference, in fact, between wearable and a phone, for example? So let's start off with the Pebble. Pebble was a Kickstarter project. They wanted to raise $100,000. They failed miserably at that. They didn't even raise $1 million or $2 million or $5 million. They raised over $10 million. And I was an early adopter. I was a backer of this project, totally independent of Evernote. I guess because of my legacy with calculator watches, I really wanted this kind of a watch. So I actually got hold of this watch. And this watch is limited in many ways. It doesn't have a swipeable screen. You can swipe on that screen as much as you want to. You're just going to make it cleaner. It doesn't have a touch-sensitive screen. The screen isn't color. It's black and white, or it's grayscale. It's an e-paper display, which means that it works in bright sunlight. And if you want to see it in the dark, you can just shake your wrist and it activates a backlight. Because it's not got a touch-sensitive screen, it has to have physical buttons. So on the left, you have a button there you can see on the top left-hand side. That's generally used to go back. Below that is the coupler for charging the device. And on the other side, we have 3 physical buttons again, to go up, to select, and to go down. And the Pebble is waterproof, not in the waterproof in the sense of you can go running and if it gets wet, it doesn't matter, or you can get splashed on. It is properly waterproof. You can go swimming with it, you can take a shower. It is properly waterproof. And much as I hate these proprietary adapters for charging, the one on the left-hand side that I showed a moment ago is kind of necessary because you don't want a hole into this device. So it attaches using a magnetic coupling and lets you charge that way. It doesn't work, or it doesn't do much by itself. It can do some things by itself, but generally it needs to be coupled with a phone. And it works with both the iPhone and Android devices. And it talks using Bluetooth, Bluetooth LE for some things like notification. So you download a special app from the App Store, the iOS App Store, or in this case here, the Google Play App Store, and you install it. And that's how you interact with the watch. It does, like I said, do something standalone. So you'll be very pleased to hear you can tell the time. So there are a lot of different, or several different watch faces that come by default, and you can install your own watch faces. You also get incoming notifications of messages. My wife, this really did happen. I was preparing a presentation, and my wife sent me a text message saying, the car won't start, please come upstairs. So up I went. So I guess there were downsides as well. So you get incoming messages or telephone calls, emails, those kind of things, and you can control it, the level of notifications you want. One of the really cool things is if you're into running, it may not look like it is, like I am to me, or may not look like I'm into running, but I do enjoy running from time to time. And I use an app on my phone called Runkeeper. And one of the really cool things is that Runkeeper will see that your watch is attached to or bonded with your phone and will automatically activate. So when I start running and I activate Runkeeper, up on my phone, just by itself, will pop up my stats, how far I've gone, how far I've been running, my pace. And for me, this is a really cool implementation because I don't have to do anything. It's kind of context sensitive. I'm running, therefore it makes sense for me to see this kind of information, just like that, just by magic. So when I'm running, I have this little Bluetooth cloud around me. I have my heart rate monitor that's talking to my phone, I have my Bluetooth headset, and I have my watch all communicating with each other. And finally, and this is actually maybe not for everybody, but my biggest use of the Pebble watch is remote control of my phone. I'm a big fan of podcasts. When I go running with my wife, she listens to music. I can tell what kind of music she's listening to because she speeds up and slows down depending on the pace. But I don't like listening to running to music. I like listening to audiobooks or podcasts. One of the podcasts I'm familiar with, or I quite like, is the This Week in Tech from the Twit network. And it's a good podcast. But they have adverts, which is fine, they have to earn money. Some of the adverts are for things like stamps.com that I can't actually buy. So I feel no guilt whatsoever in just clicking on my watch to skip over the adverts. So this remote control aspect, being able to pause, stop, fast forward, or rewind, is really handy for me. So that's enough about the watch itself. Let's talk about developing on the Pebble. So the first thing to say is that the Pebble, you program the Pebble watch in C code. And that's, I programmed a lot in C in my early developer days, but I stopped programming in the early 1990s. And when I looked at the example code that they gave, I kind of panicked a little bit because, I pick up new languages pretty quickly, but I kind of forget them pretty quickly as well. But I kind of hoped that C would be stuck in my brain. I looked at this and I didn't recognize a C code. And what I eventually realized is that although I stopped programming in C in the early 1990s, C didn't stop itself evolving. So C 1999 has a new version, and it has initializers for structures and things like that. So in order to develop for the Pebble, you first of all install the Pebble SDK. And so that sets up and you configure a folder in your path. And once you've done that, you can use the Pebble command, which is a Python script, and you can use it to create yourself a new project. So here we go, Pebble, I'm creating a new project called Demo. And that'll create a subfolder, and I can go into that subdirectory, list the contents, and I see that I've got 3 different files there. A JSON file, which is a kind of configuration file for my app, resources file that contains any pictures I want to include in my app, a source directory, and a script for building. If I look into the source directory, then we see that I have my demo.c file, which is the framework C app, which is generated by default. In order to build and run, I just use Pebble build. I enable a developer server on the phone. So you might think, well, how's that app that I've just built going to go from my computer, from my Mac or my PC, over to my phone, to my watch, sorry. Well, it does that via your phone. So in that Pebble app that I showed you, the one you download from the App Store, you download the Pebble app, and there's an option to enable kind of deployment of apps. So here I enable that, and it starts listening on a particular TCP IP address. And then I can say, use the Pebble install command, which you see at the top of the screen there, to install the app onto my watch via my phone. And so in the app, the Pebble app on the watch, on the phone, sorry, you can see that there's the app there. And if I go down now, if I scroll down on my Pebble watch, I can see my new demo app that's installed. If I activate it, then it runs, and all it does, it asks me if I want to press a button. And I can press a down button, and it shows me that. So it's gone via the phone onto my watch. And there's a new version of the SDK that was just released, version 2. Version 1 was kind of painful. There was no way of logging information. So the only thing that happened, you were back to the early days of programming where you had to kind of, I don't know, print stuff onto the watch's screen in order to debug. The new version of the SDK is much nicer. You can display logs from the watch, and you'll see it. So you can start the install command and say you want to have logs, and it'll display any log messages that are logged from your Pebble app. And what does the app code, the code itself, look like? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Here you can see I've got my main program. So every program in C has a main, and it starts running, it initializes itself, and then it logs a message. And you can see that the message that's logged there is displayed higher up on the screen, the done initializing. And at that point, my program hands control over to the Pebble, and the Pebble itself takes control of refreshing the screen and responding to clicks or to taps on the buttons, and it calls back into my code when it needs to do something, when for example, the user presses a button. And how does it do that? Well, if you look at my init function there, that's my own code, the first function that's called there. And that does a few things. It sets up the window. So on the Pebble, it's got a fairly sophisticated windowing system. First thing it does is create a new window. So for every screen, if you like, on the Pebble, there's a window. So I might display a list of menu items. I tap one of those menu items. I can just create a new screen, a new window, push it onto the window stack, do things on that, and when the user leaves that, I can go back, and I'll just unwind the window from the stack, pop it from the stack, and I'll have the previous window there. So I create my new window. I tell it what I want to have happen when the user presses buttons when that window is displayed. So there I've got my click config provider. That's actually a callback that gets called, and that basically says, okay, when the user presses the select button, I want you to call my select handler. When the user presses up, call my up handler, and so on. And if I look at the down handler, you can see that basically it just updates an element on the screen, a text layer, which we've not seen yet. The way where that text layer is actually created is in this next call here, where it sets the Windows handlers. It says, what do I want to have happen when the window is displayed, when it's loaded, and what do I want to have happen when it's unloaded? So in the window load there, basically, it initializes that text layer. So as I said, it's got a fairly sophisticated UI mechanism. You can create text layers with text. You can create UI elements with bitmaps, for example, and you can add them to a window. So that's all that's happening here, is that it's initializing that text layer and adding it to the window. So there it's creating the layer, and then afterwards it sets the text. So what I've just shown there is a standalone app, and there's nothing to stop you from creating standalone apps that run on the Pebble watch, but you're going to be limited in what you can do. So you might be able to create a Space Invaders game, for example, or something very simple. But if you want to do something a little bit more sophisticated, like an Evernote client, then you'll need to create something that runs on the phone that the watch app talks to. And that's what I've called a companion app here. So you can create an app that works in conjunction with the watch app. So you can create a phone app that runs in conjunction with the watch app to do something on behalf of the watch app. Because the watch app itself, the C library there, is very limited in what it can do. So what it can do, though, is communicate with apps on the phone. So on the watch app talks essentially Bluetooth between the test. Okay, the watch app talks Bluetooth. Can you hear me? Yeah, great. The watch app talks Bluetooth over to the phone app, and it works well. You basically pass a dictionary of name-value pairs over. But there's one thing to know, which is that the size of those messages is limited to 120 bytes. So if you're used to programming these days with JSON, with massive messages going backwards and forwards, you're in for a bit of a shock. So you have to essentially, use a binary format when you're sending messages backwards and forwards, or you have to chunk things up. The two different SDKs that you use to create watch apps, so phone apps that talk with your watch. There's an Android SDK that Pebble provide, which essentially is Java-based, and that works using standard Android constructs. So you can receive a broadcast when the user, or when I send a message from the phone app, from the watch app, or I can send an intent to send a message up to the watch. And the same thing goes with iOS. There's a standard kind of iOS Objective-C client. But there's also something which I think is kind of intriguing that they've just released, which is that you can write your watch apps in JavaScript. So this means that you're implementing that app that talks with the watch in JavaScript. So it runs on the phone, and it runs embedded within a JavaScript engine that's sitting inside the Pebble app that you download from the App Store. So this is a way of writing essentially the same code. Instead of having to write a Java code and Objective-C code, you can write your code in JavaScript and have it run within a JavaScript engine hosted within the Pebble app on the phone. I played around with it. There were some problems talking to the Evernote service because it uses a binary format. Very quickly they resolved that, and in the newer SDKs it's working great. So I don't have to write an iOS companion app and an Android companion app. I can just write one app in JavaScript. So what does the app that I created do? Well, so this is the Evernote Pebble app that I created. It essentially does everything I could think of. So you can browse your shortcuts, you can browse pin notes, you can browse notes with checkboxes, you can download browse notes in notebooks, tags. And if you go to a notebook, you can see all the different notebooks you have, and you can then browse the notes within a notebook, and you can view a note. Now, I think I did the wrong thing. I think I made a mistake here with this, and I'll talk about why later, because I basically tried to do everything, and I'm not really sure that made sense. This was a kind of an early attempt that I did. So that's the Pebble. Let's just take a quick look at the Samsung Galaxy Gear. This is a different beast. In some ways, I like to think of the Pebble as being more like the Kindle, the early Kindles, and the Galaxy Gear as being, in some ways, like the iPad. It's a different thing. The Pebble has a very limited scope, very limited capabilities. But what it does kind of well. The Galaxy Gear is actually a complete Android device. The Android is running on your watch. And it has a touch-sensitive display. It has a color display. On the side, it's got a single button. And you interact with it by swiping on the screen. You swipe left and right. You can go to your apps, and you can obviously there see the Evernote app. I spent a few days at the Berlin IFA event when this device was launched. And I must admit, I spent a lot of time explaining to Germans that were coming in how to exit a screen. Because it's obvious once you know, which is that you have to just swipe essentially down from the top all the way down, and that's how you go back up. So I learned some German in order to explain that. So there's this particular motion. There's nothing on the screen to show you, okay, how do you go back up? You swipe down from the very top. Now, if you swipe down from the very top when you're on the home screen, you activate the camera, because there's a camera built into the band there. And you can use that to take photos or videos. And as well as a camera, there's also
a microphone built in as well. So you can really do the whole Dick Tracy thing of receiving a telephone call and talking on the on using your watch. But don't make no mistake, it's not a there's no SIM card sitting inside that watch. It still works in conjunction with your phone. In fact, it works with the specific Samsung phones, such as the Galaxy S4 here. And just like with the Pebble, there's a Gear Manager app that you have to download and install on the on your phone in order to install apps, such as the Evernote app. And they have their own app store for apps. If we talk about what we actually did, or what I actually implemented on the Galaxy Gear, one of the newer features we added to Evernote recently in the last year was the ability to create reminders. So you can have a note here. Here I'm reminding myself to feed my llama. I don't actually have a llama, but I basically say, okay, I want to be notified tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning to feed my llama, and tomorrow at 9 o'clock Evernote will pop up and show me this note. And this is kind of an obvious use case for the Galaxy, for smart devices. Here I'm being notified, okay, actually it was at 14:23, don't forget to feed your llama. So that just pops up on your watch just like that. And you can decide at that point, do I want to see this note on my phone, or do I just want to dismiss it? That kind of happens in the background, but if I click on the Evernote app there, I can essentially do 4 different things. I can take photos and send them to Evernote. So if I click on that photo button, the camera starts up, and off the Evernote, and I tap the screen, off goes the photo I've just taken, and it goes into my Evernote account. So here's my Mac, and here's that photo I just took. You can also obviously take audio recordings, and this is kind of handy if I'm sitting in the car, or I'm somewhere I can't just pull out my phone and start recording. I can just long press the button, because you can configure the button on the side to do different things, and start up Evernote and start recording an audio note. Those are kind of those are kind of around capturing things. The other 2 things I can do, and this is where I think things start to get a little bit more general and more interesting for me, is being able to browse my content, but not just like I did on the Pebble, where you can just do everything. You can look at your notes and notebooks and shortcuts, and you can look at your tags. Here it's very kind of focused. If I'm going into a meeting, say at Facebook, and I know the name of the person I'm going to meet, maybe back in my office I looked up their name in my Evernote account because I want to remember their partner's name. Later on, I'm just about to open the door and walk into the meeting, and I completely forgotten the name again. Because I looked at that note recently on my Evernote on my desktop or on my Android device, I can actually very quickly go on my phone, click on recent notes, and there I can remember, oh yeah, that's the partner name of the person I'm meeting. And the last one is very similar. It's actually I got an email from somebody really wanting this functionality, which is I'm in the supermarket. And I've got 2 hands, one's pushing the trolley, the other one's holding my kid. I can't really juggle my phone as well. Wouldn't it be cool if on my watch I could not only see my shopping list, but I could also check items off? So notes inside Evernote can contain lists of items, including checkbox items, and we let you check those off on the Gear. So that's the functionality that the app implemented. In terms of how it got implemented, I'm limited in what I can tell you, because Samsung haven't made available a public SDK for the Samsung Galaxy Gear. What I can say, though, is that the Gear or Evernote on the Gear is talking, obviously, using Bluetooth over to my Samsung Android phone. And it doesn't. What I've done is I implemented a companion app. Now, that companion app, you might imagine, then goes off to Evernote. It uses the Evernote API to the Evernote service to implement the functionality that you've just seen. But actually, what I do is I talk to a standard Evernote client that's sitting on my Android device. Because Evernote on my Android device has already logged the user in. It's already synchronized a load of functionality, a load of content. It's already got embedded in it a load of functionality that I can reuse. And because this is Android, I can use standard Android constructs, such as intents and content providers. Because the Evernote app is implemented in a good way, I can access those and access all the Evernote content and create notes, for example, just using those standard constructs. And then finally, the standard Evernote app goes over the internet and talks to the Evernote public API, the Evernote service. But actually, it doesn't need to do that all the time. So for example, when I looked at those recent notes, it didn't have to go over to the internet. That would work completely offline, whether or not I had an internet connection. So by reusing the Evernote app, I can do that. So this is something I would recommend, if it makes sense in your scenario, is to reuse existing apps rather than going over to the internet. So let's just quickly look at the Sony smartwatch 2. This is, again, this kind of, for me, sits somewhere between the Pebble and the Galaxy Gear. Again, it's got a touch screen. Again, it's got a charging thing on the side. But this one is not, this is actually using standard micro USB. It's not a magnetic charger like on the Pebble, which has its advantages. It's a standard USB port. The disadvantages of this device, it won't be completely waterproof. It's splash-proof, that's kind of sealed, but you wouldn't go swimming with this device. And on the other side, you have a single power button, which when you press, it activates the device. At the bottom of the screen there, you'll see that there are 3 buttons, or 3 icons, back, home, and menu, which are standard Android things. So it doesn't have any gestures like the Galaxy Gear does. It isn't used via buttons on the side like the Pebble. Instead, it's got those buttons there at the bottom of the screen. So obviously, there are a load of different apps built in, including any apps that you install yourself. So this is the Evernote app that I created for the Sony smartwatch 2. It's not public, it's kind of experimental. I'm not going to talk about the top 2 items because you've already seen those with the Gear. But I kind of started experimenting a little bit more with context. So what's going to be useful for you on your watch? So one of the things is those reminder notes, because on Evernote, people don't only use reminder notes to set a reminder. You can actually create a reminder note without a date, but what happens is they get pinned to the top of your list. So any notes that you pin like that are likely to be useful for you. So that's why I let you access them directly. And the final thing is nearby notes. And this, for me, is kind of where it starts to get even more interesting, is I'm based on my context. I'm about to walk into Evernote, to Facebook, or I'm about to walk into a restaurant. Wouldn't it be nice if I could see any notes that I created there previously? So that's what this is about. It uses GPS functionality of your phone to find any notes that you've created recently or created in that location, because notes can have GPS information associated with them. And so I can see the notes that I created nearby to my current location. And I can look at the note. What's different about this is that you don't write any code that runs on the watch. So the Sony smartwatch does have an open SDK that you can download, but you don't write code that runs on the watch. All you do is write Android code. So it works with most Android devices. And what happens is that the UI that you generate or you create gets remoted onto the watch. So this is a different way of doing things. In the Pebble, it was a very simple C-based API. The Galaxy Gear is full Android. This is something else. I don't actually know what's sitting on there. It could be Android, but it doesn't really matter because you don't write code that runs on the watch. You write code that runs on the phone. And so the UI is remoted across, and you get callbacks when things happen. What's interesting is that you write the user interface for your app using the standard Android constructs. So Android, you define your user interface using layouts. It's an XML-based format. And this is essentially what it looks like. It looks like any other layout. If you're familiar with Android, this will be familiar with you. But this isn't code that's running on the phone. This UI gets remoted and runs on the watch itself. So here's part of my grid where you can see the checkbox. One of the checkboxes that's being, or one of the icons that's being displayed, in this case, it's the checkbox icon. So this is standard Android code. That has some really interesting implications for me. As I mentioned before, debugging on the watch, not so easy. Here, you don't have to debug any code that runs on the watch. You just debug your code that runs on the phone. So it's very easy to debug, and it's very, very, very good for simple applications. Kind of like the Evernote application, where you just have a grid of icons, you have some lists, and you display some content. The downside is that the UI is limited. What you can do with the UI is limited. So specifically, if you go to Stack Overflow and you find people saying, well, how do I display a text box that's scrollable on the screen? You can't do that using the Sony smartwatch 2. Now, what I do when I hit a problem like that is I think, that's too tempting a target. I've got to find a way of working around it. There's this concept you may have heard of called rubber ducking. What you do is you get a rubber duck, you stick it on top of your monitor like a big yellow rubber duck, and you explain the problem to the rubber duck. But I didn't have a rubber duck at home, but what I do have is an 8-year-old boy. So I grabbed him, sat him down, and I just told him to nod as I was explaining the problem. He didn't really understand at all what I was saying. And occasionally he would go to quack and just and kind of give me some feedback. So I explained this problem to him, and yeah, the solution kind of came to me, which is rather than trying to display a text box, what I ended up doing is rendering the text in memory to a bitmap, splitting that text up into chunks, that bitmap map up into chunks, and rendering the bitmaps as items in a list, so that it actually does work, kind of. So it's a list with the text. Nobody knows that it's actually a list box with bitmaps that I'm rendering in screen. So the architecture for this is, as I mentioned, different. There's no code that I write running on the watch. Instead, it's talking using Bluetooth to my app that runs on the Android device itself. And just in the same way, it talks to the standard Evernote app, and that talks to the outside world, just like with the Galaxy Gear. So that's the Sony Smartwatch 2. Finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Google Glass. So the Google Glass works both with Android and with iOS. So in this case here, I'm showing it with iOS. Just like with the Sony Smartwatch or the Pebble or with the Galaxy Gear, Google have an app, a Glass app, that you can activate on your Pebble watch. Sorry, on your iOS device. So there it started up. It's now going to try and connect to my watch. Sorry, to my Google Glass. I can then browse down and I can start up a screencast. So what you see here is actually what I see on my screen. I can say OK Glass on my Google Glass, and I can move my head up and down, and I can see the various different actions that I want to activate. Or I can swipe on the side to swipe back up. So the side is touchable. So I can swipe to the left or to the right, and I can see a timeline of events, cards. In this case here, it's some emails that I've received or photos that I've taken. I can also go the other way and see some context information, such as the weather and information about the battery life. But if I go back and I say OK Glass, I can then swipe up and down or look up and down. I can say take a picture. And it'll activate the camera. I can then say, OK, Glass, show or send to. And then I can say Evernote. And then I'll say Evernote. And I'll say Evernote with an American accent. And then that works for some reason. It doesn't seem to like my British accent. So I can send it to Evernote, and off that photo goes to Evernote. So the way this works is that just like before, we have the Bluetooth talking to the Google Glass, to a Google Glass companion app, just like all the other companion apps we saw, which is talking to the standard Evernote app, which is talking using standard Android constructs to the internet. But I'm also thinking about talking directly to the internet, to the Evernote service, directly from your Google Glass. Now, a word about what makes sense for wearable devices. There are 5 things that I think, having played around with this technology, having used it, I'm an early adopter, which means that I've kind of got a specific vision, a specific perspective. But my perspective is that the first thing that obviously makes sense are notifications. My watch has been buzzing as I've been talking, because obviously things are happening. Tweets are being tweeted, emails are being sent to me. Those are kind of are obvious, but what I think makes much more sense are context-sensitive notifications. So if I'm walking into that meeting at Facebook, why can't Evernote, the Evernote app, automatically tell me, hey, you've been here before, there are 3 notes you created at this location, not 500, because then it probably wouldn't make sense. Probably I'm walking into my house or something. But smart notifications based on your context, based on your location, based on who you were with, make much more sense to me. There are many people that say, smartwatches, complete waste of time. I haven't worn a watch in 5 years. But many of those same people are wearing fitness bands that are essentially the same kind of things. And I see an evolution, a convergence between these fitness devices and smartwatches. These fitness devices, these wristbands, are starting to have notifications of emails. The smartwatches are starting to have sensors, about motion sensors. The Galaxy Gear and the Pebble have accelerometers built into them. So I see a convergence of these two different devices. Just like with the flip cam, I don't know if anybody remembers those, it was all the rage. Everybody wanted a flip cam. And then suddenly nobody wanted them because the functionality was incorporated into your smartphone. In just the same way, I expect there to be a convergence to have all this kind of fitness sensing incorporated into more generalized wearable devices. I can't help but think that at some point not too far from now, someone's going to die and they're going to use the fitness, the watch or the wearable device as kind of like a black box. You know, when a plane crashes, they look at the black box and they try and work out what happened. It's got to happen sooner or later that someone's wearing a wearable device and they're going to be able to look and see, oh yeah, his heart was going a little bit wobbly just before he collapsed or whatever. Of course, it'd be even cooler if the app could, or the smart device itself could then notify the health services or whatever. But I see that kind of thing coming. Control of devices is something that I'm in two minds about. If you've got a touch-sensitive screen, then you're not going to be able to just control the music without thinking about it. You've got to look on the screen and tap the right place and swipe and move up and down. Whereas I want it to be automatic. With my watch, my Pebble watch, when I control the music on my podcast or skip forwards or whatever it is I'm doing, I don't even think about it. In fact, sometimes my watch is charging. I'm listening to a podcast I just go to skip over the advert and there's nothing there. But for me, it's got to be automatic. It's got to be automatic in the sense that you don't even think about it. It's got to be automatic in the sense that it uses your basal ganglia, which is the part of the brain that gets trained so that when you do something automatically without thinking about it, that's where it happens. And I see these wearable devices as kind of being an extension of yourself. Not only are you going to control your phone as I'm doing now, but you're going to control your computer to skip forward in presentations, or your car to start up the engine before you go out, or even your house when you leave it. But it's got to be, for me anyway, it's got to be kind of automatic. It can't be something too fiddly, because otherwise you might as well just pull out your watch, or your phone, sorry, and use that. It's got to be automatic. Capturing of information is an obvious thing as well. So as you saw with the Galaxy Gear, you can take photos, audio notes, videos. It's really handy, especially if you've got young kids, to be able to, they say that the best camera is the camera you've got with you. It's really nice to be able to say, okay, Glass, take a video. And I actually have 2 small kids at home and a puppy, so the world is full of advanced possibilities of taking photos. It's really great, but there are definitely privacy implications, and I think society as a whole is still trying to work out what the implications are. Some people are absolutely horrified about walking around with Google Glass and possibility of taking photos all the time. Being English, I'm not that comfortable, walking around with this ostentatious thing sitting on my head. So I'm still working it out. I don't wear it all the time, but sometimes it definitely is very, very useful. And the final thing that I see wearable devices for, and in some ways the least likely, is for consumption of information. Because the work involved, looking at an Evernote note, for example, on your watch, has got to be significantly less than the work involved in pulling out your phone, typing in your passcode, navigating to the right app, starting the app, and navigating the information on your phone. So, as I said before, the kind of context-sensitive information based on your location or based on who you're with, those kind of things, or based on the time of day, those are the kind of things that make sense. So that when you look at your watch, the information is already there, rather than having to navigate to it. So, just to summarize, nearly finished. What I've talked about today, what I've shared with you, some of my experiences of developing for these various different devices. From the Pebble, which has a very limited scope, the implementation language is C, so it's very low level, but it does what it does quite well. It has quite a long battery life. The Galaxy Gear, which is the all-singing, all-dancing device, a lot of power there, but there are some limitations in terms of battery life, for example. The Sony smartwatch, which does things in quite a different way, where you remote the user interface onto the watch, so you don't write any code that actually runs on the watch itself. And the Google Glass, which is, again, a complete Android device, where you're faced with choices about, do you write an autonomous app that talks directly to the internet, or do you write something that works in conjunction with your phone? I talked about the various different use cases, from notifications of information, especially smart notifications, sensors, health sensors, the convergence of health sensors into wearable devices. Control, the fact that I think it's really got to be automatic. You can't be thinking about it. You can't be looking at your watch or whatever it is. It's got to be something you can do just like that. Capture with its privacy implications, but it's so handy. And consumption, which is in some ways what works well for Evernote, but it's got to be easy to access when you consume information. This is clearly really early days for wearable devices. These are first generation devices, you know, Pebble, the Google Glass, these are early days. And the people that are using it are early adopters. You can't really judge the apps based on, you know, what a more general audience would want yet, because these are early days with early devices, and they're being used by early adopters who are kind of keen on these kind of things. For me, it's really exciting times. We're on the start of something. We're on the start of a new kind of phase of using the information. And we've really got to think, what makes sense? Why would you actually want to use these kind of devices? It's possible to do all kinds of things. These are full computers sitting on our watches. You can do anything. You've really got to think, though, about what makes sense based on the context and based on the different use cases between the watch and the phone. Okay, that's it. If you have any questions for me, feel free to ask them now or afterwards. I'm happy to talk about this kind of technology. I believe there may be microphones around, so if you have a question, I see a question there, don't hesitate.
Hello, as you're more familiar with these trends as we are now. And what are your guesses regarding the old stuff? Because for myself, I like this Pebble idea for this point. It does include like a state of the art of current phone market. So it takes the iOS and Android into account in the best way I see it. So this gives me a hope it can be like evolving into a more rich adoption. How do you feel this?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So the question is, how do I see things evolving?
How do you think it's gonna go toward?
Yeah.
Toward what?
Well, everybody, I mean, it's the thing that everybody says, but it's also true. That's the reason everybody says it. Everybody's waiting to see what Google and Apple do. My guess, and I have absolutely no inside knowledge here, is that if Google release a watch, it's going to be based on the same metaphor as the glass. You're going to have swipeable cards that you can interact with. So my guess is if you're developing for the glass, they may be able to reuse some of that code for any watch that they may produce. As far as what Apple does, I have no idea. It's going to be amazing, of course, but I don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah, because at that point, like major players are going on Android, and from this like psychological point of view, is like iPhone user and Apple users are also early adopters pretty often. So this is for me, it is really weird. This doesn't really doesn't really come with a decent project for the Apple users at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Apple have a very different philosophy, obviously, around a tightly integrated hardware. You know, they work really well within their own ecosystem. So I'd imagine anything Apple does is going to be Apple specific. Google, on the other hand, you know, they have the iOS Google Glass app, so they seem to be a little bit more general. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.